There is a certain dignity to the barrier islands of Louisiana. These unique microcosms extend along the state's shoreline, serving as natural guardians for intricate ecologies. They harbor fisheries, protect nurseries, and provide habitat for a vast variety of plants and animals.
Barrier Islands are important in South Louisiana for a variety of reasons. They form that critical line between what we think of as our state, Louisiana, and the ocean, the Gulf of Mexico. So our barrier islands serve a structural purpose in terms of knocking down storm surge and providing that line in the sand that maintains the estuarine gradient, the bays of Louisiana, which are so important for commercial fisheries production, and the open waters of the Gulf of Mexico. We're in one of the major flyways for migratory waterfowl, supporting the entire nation. And a lot of those waterfowl use Louisiana barrier islands to overwinter or for stopping grounds.
As migratory birds come across the Gulf, this is the first place that they can touch down on land, feed, and rest up from their journeys. For instance, the piping plover, which is an endangered species, this is considered critical habitat by the government as part of their recovery, and this is where they winter as they migrate through here, and so it's an important feeding location for them. Pelicans nesting on some of these barrier islands and using these barrier islands. Because again, there's a sand source here as part of the island and the beach. There are certain organisms that, and particularly fisheries, that use these sand bottoms for reproduction and feeding areas that they don't use necessarily other parts of the marsh. Things like speckled trout reproduce in the surf, and of course that's a very popular fishery species here, recreational fishery species. So they're very important for a lot of different organisms.
Louisiana's barrier islands are often called the state's first line of defense against the storm forces of wave action and surge. Along with coastal wetlands, they protect land, families, and livelihoods. The barrier islands also help preserve the vibrant communities and rich cultures of the region. Now, however, these islands are critically endangered. Natural and man-made forces have caused a rapid rate of land loss, and many of these small islands are at risk of disappearing completely within 50 years. With them will go the habitats and ecologies that they hold, as well as their capacity to reduce the destructive effects of tropical storms and hurricanes.
Barrier islands in Louisiana are actually a byproduct of our delta cycle. Coastal Louisiana was formed by the Mississippi River changing its deltas over the years. And barrier islands are kind of the final stage of delta development. After the Mississippi River abandons one delta, that material stays there and is reworked by Mother Nature. And our barrier islands are that final sandy shoreline.
Change has always been a characteristic of the barrier islands. Never permanent or static features of the landscape, the barrier islands and the Louisiana shoreline constantly grow, migrate, and erode over their natural lifespan. As barrier islands degrade, the gaps between the islands, called passes, increase in size and number. Over the last century, man-made levees designed to contain the flooding of the Mississippi also halted the natural movement of the river. As a result, no new deltas were created to deliver sediment along the coast, no newly abandoned deltas were disappearing, and no new barrier islands were created.
Basically, by man leveeing the river and not allowing the channel to switch anymore, you don't see a new delta forming in locations as would happen, and you don't see new barrier islands. And the cycle of barrier islands is such that eventually they erode away, they disappear, and they turn to shoals. But because we've locked the system down now, if we're going to maintain some sort of barrier system, we basically have to manually do that by introducing sediment.
Today, there are technologies that can supplement the natural processes of these vital coastal islands and reverse some of the land loss. And even as the barrier islands and their passes shift and change, coastal restoration efforts can positively affect the whole system, including the fragile coastal wetlands and barrier shorelines. Currently, there are coastal restoration projects underway on Louisiana's barrier islands under the Coastal Wetlands Planning, Protection, and Restoration Act, or CWPPRA. One such project is the West Bell Pass Barrier Headland Restoration Project.
Here at the West Bell Pass Barrier Headland CWPPRA project, we're basically taking sand from offshore, dredging it and placing it on the beach, building a beach and a dune, basically to move the shoreline gulfward so that we can offset erosion. And then we're building back marsh using silts and muds from offshore to create marsh for this dune and beach as it continues to erode in the future to wash back on to maintain its elevation.
Located along the Cheniere Caminada Headland to the west of West Bell Pass, CWPPRA's 100th restoration project was recently completed.
You know, we first started some of these projects a few years ago in the Barataria system and specifically on barrier islands. You know, people said it couldn't really be done. You know, there were too many conflicts, too many competing interests, too many complications. And we have a lot of oil and gas industry in South Louisiana, which is an important part of our economy, but they also have a lot of infrastructure. So that's a challenge. We have a lot of fisheries, commercial and recreational. And these guys have been doing the same thing, you know, for generations. And so people become a little bit resistant or afraid, concerned about change. And so when we resolve those issues and we do things that folks said, you know, I don't really know that you can do that, maybe that can't be done. And you stand here where it was 5 feet deep a week ago, and you know, now you're up at +8. We're going to have 400 new acres. We're going to have a solid shoreline for 2 miles in this area. There's nothing like that feeling of accomplishing the goal and you walk away and there's a new island. We're really trying to engineer an ecosystem. It's new science, it's new engineering, and we're breaking new ground in our coastal restoration program every day.
The barrier islands and shorelines of Louisiana are critically important, not only to the state, but to the nation as a whole.
The barrier islands are the most important because they are the first line of defense from storm surge. And everybody knows that. We always say that, right? But they protect all the infrastructure. So if we don't have oil and gas, and we don't have seafood, and we don't have habitat, we don't have a community, what happens? The barrier islands actually protect New Orleans. Think about it.
The barrier islands and shorelines of Louisiana have a certain pride of place.
We have been diligently going after coastal restoration and barrier islands. I'm a big proponent of barrier islands because I believe you have to rebuild your barrier islands. It is our first line of defense against a hurricane. I don't believe there's ever been a governor in the history of Louisiana that has gone aggressively after the restoration of barrier islands, coastal restoration, and hurricane protection as Governor Bobby Jindal did in the Louisiana legislature. We have aggressively gone after it. Being part of our heritage, something we grew up going to as young men and women and children.
My favorite part about the barrier islands is floundering at night with a lantern, Coleman lantern, and a stick with a pick in it. And seeing that eye open up and getting that flounder and bringing it home and stuffing it with fresh shrimp. It's delicious. It's my favorite memory, walking the beach and floundering. Awesome. You know, staying out here, pitching a tent, building a fire. How many people got their own beach?
With CWPPRA's federal efforts and Louisiana's state match, along with local support, coastal restoration efforts can continue to restore and enhance Louisiana's barrier islands and shoreline, preserving both their protective presence and their exquisite ecologies.